Hey, ioStux here. This video is going to be a bit different to what I usually did with my coaching sessions. During this video, I'm going to go over the first section of one of my recent coaching sessions. The way that I structure my sessions is that I have an initial assessment at the start of the session, followed by the actual VOD review afterwards. We're not going to go into the VOD review portion of this review. Instead, I'm going to guide you through the initial assessment, where I attempt to find a player's core issue on what's really preventing them from climbing. For a bit of context, every client has to fill out a form before they can schedule a coaching session. You can find that form on my website, ioStux.com, if you're interested. But it's not needed to follow along in this video. This won't be all that visual, so you don't have to watch the actual video as long as you can listen to the audio.
Okay.
Good. Now, here's how we're going to structure this. Before we get into the VOD, I want to go over some more general stuff in the form that you had to fill out when you got the session. So whenever I do my initial assessment, I always start with more general questions to kind of, get a broader picture of who I'm working with, and then I start to work my way into more specific issues, right? So, at the start I go over things like how much time they put into the game, what their hero pool looks like, to try to find really, really, very major flaws. And then once I've, decided that those aren't the issue, that's when I start looking into more specific things to really try to figure out what is holding that particular player back. The first question that I have is, I asked you how many hours you put into the game, and you said 20 plus hours a week question mark. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so I usually don't estimate exactly, but I feel like it is leaning more to 20. I play around maybe 5. It depends on the day, honestly, but I can almost average at least. Let's see, I want to average 3 to 4 hours almost every day, really. It's been getting a little bit less and less just because I've been dropping a lot recently. But yeah, I want to estimate. I didn't want to overestimate it or underestimate it, so I feel like 20 is a good, area that I'm at. Maybe.
So after his answer, I could pretty much conclude that the amount of time that he puts into the game isn't really the issue. As a general rule of thumb, the absolute minimum that I usually require of players is around 15 hours a week if they really want to be able to climb at a decent pace. For players that have higher aspirations of getting into GM or top 500, I generally recommend between 20 to 25 hours. There are cases where players can get less than 10 hours a week into competitive and they don't play consistently every single day. And in those cases, I'm usually very honest with the coaches and I tell them that, hey, if this is the maximum amount of time that you can put into the game, then you cannot expect to compete with players that are putting in twice, if not 3 times as much time into the game into you. So now that I know that he plays enough, the next question is, how does he use that time? So how do you utilize that time? What do you do during those 20 plus hours?
Usually I just do a certain amount of that is going to be in Widow headshot lobbies, and the other percentage or the rest of it is going to be in just me playing comp.
Can you give me the specific percentages?
Okay, I would say maybe so let's say I do maybe 30 minutes to warm up for Widow headshot lobbies, maybe 1 or 2 games of that usually, and then the rest of it is just straight up competitive.
So that's not really the answer that I wanted, because this doesn't help me, right? So he plays the game enough to where he shouldn't be stuck in Diamond. And he also seems to utilize that time fine. Taking into account that he's a hit scan player, him playing Widow headshot lobbies to warm up is fine. Ideally, if he doesn't play a lot of Widowmaker, I generally recommend a general FFA warm-up over a very specific Widow headshot warm-up. But at this point, I didn't want to mention that to the coachee because I felt like that is not really his issue. I kind of singled that out. And I generally avoid trying to mention issues to the players that don't directly affect him. So in this case, I didn't want to tell him that, he could optimize his warm-up routine because quite frankly, it wouldn't make that big of a difference. And I didn't want him to think that, that actually played a part in his core issues. So okay,
yeah,
that's fine. Next question. You mentioned that your hero pool is Widow, Ash, Sombra, McCree. Is that your entire hero pool, or is there more that you just didn't write down? So this is another issue that a lot of players have. They either have hero pools that are too specialized or hero pools that aren't specialized enough. So one very common concern that I have with players and why they aren't climbing is that they're putting themselves into this flex category. But but it's less of a flex category and it's more of a I just play whatever, right? So if the team needs a support, they can play all support heroes, they can play all off tanks, all main tanks, all hit scan, all flex DPS. And that doesn't really work because when you're playing a character, let's say you're focused on 5 different roles, that means that per role you only put in 1/5 of your time. Whereas someone else that focuses exclusively on that role, he's going to be able to put in a lot more time into that particular role. So there's no way for you to really compete against him because it just puts more time into it. Now, there is also a benefit to being a little bit flexible because certain games are going to be easier if you have a character that you can flex to. But generally that goes to the extent of maybe having one character of a different role than your main role that you can flex to. But again, some players just take that way too far. So this is where I wanted to go next. I wanted to understand if he's actually only focusing on hit scan heroes, as he mentioned in the forum, or if he's maybe not being super honest and if he's playing a lot more characters than that.
Oh, okay. So those are like my main 4. And then I do play soldier, and then I had I was told to try to pick up a little bit of Zarya. I have like a couple Zarya VODs. It's just that I don't think that I should really expand it that much yet, just because I feel like I can just focus on like the hit scan DPS role.
Mm-hmm. So this was the point where I knew this session is going to be very unique, right? Because usually by this point I already have a good idea of what's wrong with a player, but he puts in the time, his schedule looks fine, he's not wasting any time in quick play or anything. He realizes that having a specialized hero pool on one role is very, very important. So I was kind of scratching my head. I didn't really know what was wrong. He even mentioned that he was starting to learn Zarya, which is actually very good because in the current meta, as a hit scan player, being able to play Zarya even for solo queue is very, very valuable. Right, so he seemed to be having all the right answers, but obviously that didn't reflect itself in the fact that he has been playing the game for over a year and he's still in Diamond, despite the fact that he's putting in over 20 hours a week and that everything else was fine, right? So I knew that this session was going to be difficult, and this was the point where I started to try and get at least a little bit more specific with my questions.
Yeah, so it would be just mainly those, or sorry.
So can you be a bit more specific?
Like or like what do you mean, I guess?
Okay, so in terms of time investment, how much of your time actually goes into those 4 characters?
Oh, into those okay, I see. So Widow, I do try to focus a lot, but with the whole like game kind of, she was my old main. I used to spend nonstop time on her, but now that there's bunkers and everything, I just get shut down a lot faster. So I've been focusing a lot on Sombra this season,
Mm-hmm.
and I've put a lot of time into her. I think I've put like around 75 games for last time I checked. I can't remember exactly the hours, but around 70 plus games now this season
Mm-hmm.
on her. My win rate is like 40% on her, but she's like, I feel like is more useful in the bunker, especially since I played her a little bit against goats. I've been putting a little bit more time on her, so she's been taking a little bit more compared to like my Widow, which used to be my number 1 hero at like around maybe 30 plus hours a season, maybe. And then under that would be Ash, which was most likely around the same 30 plus.
So now I'm slowly starting to get a better picture of where this player actually stands. Again, he seems to have a very good understanding. The fact that he switched from playing mostly Widowmaker, Widowmaker is generally a pick that does better in regular 2-2 metas, whereas she struggles against very tanky comps or very super hard dive like Hammond triple DPS comps. That's where she generally struggles a lot. So he already made the decision to switch to Sombra, which is definitely a very good choice taking into account the current meta. But he did share a piece of information that was very important, because he said that he spent the majority of his games in Sombra, but that his win rate was very, very low with Sombra. So now I have something to work with, because his hero pool was fine, the amount of time that he puts into the game was fine, everything was fine. This was the first information that he shared with me where something was wrong. So I needed to start to investigate this a little bit more and try to find the root of this issue, essentially. Now, at this point in the coaching session itself, I wasn't really aware of which path I wanted to go down with this player, right? But obviously, in retrospect and just through experience, I generally tend to find my way as I get more and more information. It's kind of like a puzzle where you don't necessarily need all of the pieces to really figure out what the puzzle is supposed to represent. And it's kind of similar to you. So I'm getting more and more puzzle pieces, and it's looking, clearer and clearer. Mm-hmm. Okay. No, that's fine in of itself as well. In October, is that when you got the game?
Yes, I had. Yeah, that's when finally got a PC because I used to play on console. I mean, yeah, on Xbox. I hit Masters there, so I've been really like, oh wow, I really want to move to PC, and then I finally got my PC and started getting onto Overwatch on PC.
So you played on console before.
Yes, yeah,
How much time did you
and
spend on
then
console before you went into over to PC?
around the same amount of time. I used to try to like just want to be good, but I didn't really focus too much onto it. I didn't put the time as like taking it seriously on console because I really couldn't take it seriously because it is console. So I
Mm-hmm.
didn't really. I just played to get good. I guess I didn't really. Oh yeah, I didn't play to get good. I just
Okay, now that last part and what I'm talking about here with the coachee is going to be a little bit of red herring. Again, I mentioned earlier the analogy with the puzzle. I'm just trying to see if I can get a few more puzzle pieces and a little bit more extra information before I really make a conclusion. Later on in the session, I am going to conclude that I need to follow the trail with the Sombra low win percentage a little bit more, but I just wanted to make sure that I cover all my bases, and it's very important that you don't make any premature conclusions when you're coaching someone, right? You can't just say, oh, 2 minutes into the session, I know exactly what's wrong with this player. It's always important to just go along every single possible avenue, get as much information as you can, and make sure that when you tell him what's wrong with his gameplay, that is the actual issue. In this case, him switching from PC to console isn't really all that relevant, right? But there's always a chance that when a player shares that information, that he's going to share some extra information that maybe he didn't intend to share or that I didn't ask him for, that could actually be useful to me.
played. I guess.
What was your motivation to switch?
I really, really, really wanted to like get good. I really wanted to like experience the mouse and keyboard. I wanted to experience like the mini tournaments that they have on what was it? Um, I don't know what the website's
Don't worry.
called.
Like AG Weekly and
Um,
stuff, I know what you mean.
yeah, experience that. I really wanted to like reach the peak of like the Overwatch because this is the only game that I play. Like I can't besides Osu, I guess maybe I don't touch any other game.
So in this case, even though him being a former console player and switching to PC isn't directly relevant to the issue that I figure out he actually has in the end, but it's still very useful information, not just for this session, but also as I guide the player further on, right? The kind of mantra that I follow with my sessions is once a coachee, always a coachee, which means that any of the clients that I work with, I always try to work with them even after the session. They can ask me questions, etc. And even though I asked him about his switch from console to PC, the information that I gathered actually is that he's very competitive and that he's very serious about the game. He doesn't play any other games. His schedule clearly isn't out of boredom, but rather out of dedication. And that is all very important information because it tells me more about the player personality of the player, right? So the reason that he's playing this much is not necessarily because he's addicted to the game or anything. It's because he's genuinely interested in becoming the best player that he can possibly be. And that's also the reasoning behind why he switched. One example where this wouldn't be the case is if someone starts on console and switched to PC, and the reason for that is because they wanted to play with friends. Right. In that case, that doesn't really tell me much about the competitiveness of a player because that reasoning obviously isn't, very competitive. It's very personal, and then all of a sudden gives me a very different picture of the coachee than when in this case he switched from console to PC because he wanted to be more competitive and he wanted to be on the main competitive esports platform that Overwatch is being played on. Okay.
So I really wanted to like expand it, and then I wanted to do this game in college too. So um, I wanted to play for a team, but I can't afford going out for a team, so I have to stay in state. So I have to settle for that. But I am going to be hopefully playing it with a couple friends in college or competitively if they have a club.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You're making it very, very difficult. I'm gonna tell you that. Usually by now I would have already had like a pretty solid grasp of what someone's core fundamental issue is, but you're making it very, very difficult actually. Which now, mentioning to the coachee that he is making this very difficult for me is generally not really a good idea. The reason I did it here is because I'm kind of stupid, and I was honestly, this doesn't happen very often, right? It was very not shocking to me, but it was kind of catching me off guard. So I guess I just kind of said it like, hey, this is kind of difficult actually. This is pretty challenging. I'm not used to this, right? Usually my sessions are a lot easier, right? But in general, whenever I'm working with someone or whenever you're coaching someone, you don't really want to share information like this, like, oh, you're making it difficult, or ever really give off the impression that you don't know what you're doing. Because as coach, it's always very important that you exude a lot of confidence, because that confidence gets into the players that you work with. There are a lot of coaches actually, and again, I don't mean to shit on anyone, but there are some coaches that don't really actually do a good job at explaining, new concept to the players, who are actually teaching the players a lot. But what they are very good at is being very confident about what they're talking about, and that sort of confidence goes into the player's mind, and then they use that confidence that they kind of mirror from their coach in their games. And even though what they're doing still isn't optimal, they're being a lot more confident about it, and that generally leads to better results. So in this case, mentioning that he's making it difficult, obviously is not very confident, but then again, I was always also being very honest, because usually this doesn't happen. Now, this is when I knew, when I admitted that this was getting a bit difficult, that's when I knew that I had to change my approach, and that's when I got a little bit back into the whole Sombra conversation.
I'm sorry.
It's a bit
Oh,
more. No, you're answering my questions just fine, but so far you seem. Okay, let me try a different approach, actually. You mentioned that you were feeling useless. Can you go a bit into that?
yeah. So like, as I was with my hero pool, with my like main, because my main three was gonna be Widow, Ashe, and McCree,
Mm-hmm.
but because of that bunker, I just feel so useless like playing against that with my top three heroes. Because it used to be automatic pick Widow, automatic pick Ashe, and then when Ashe doesn't fall, Sombra. And my Sombra just is also feeling useless because I don't know how to play her either.
Mm-hmm.
70 plus games and 40% win rate, it kind of like, it tells me, hey, you're not doing good, you know. Um, Same thing with Widow. I feel like sometimes I just die too many times, and then I just feel like, because I feel sometimes my mechanic skills are great, sometimes they're not, sometimes my positioning is great, sometimes it isn't. So it's just that feeling of almost feeling useless every game.
And that was the turning point in the session, because all of a sudden I was no longer just, grasping in the dark. I actually had something concrete to work with. Because what you might have not have noticed, but what he specifically said there didn't actually matter. It's kind of irrelevant. The important part is how he said it and how he phrased those things. And if you go back and you listen to that again, the important part that I got out of that is that he doesn't know exactly what he's talking about. Which is obvious, right? What does that actually mean? What I'm trying to say is that he said that he was playing, Widow automatically, and then he went on to Ashe automatically, and then on Widowmaker he was feeling kind of useless and he didn't know why, and then on Sombra he felt kind of useless and he didn't know why, and that is very, very valuable information for me, because now I have something to work with, right? So him telling me that he defaults to Widowmaker and then defaults to Ashe, and that he essentially picks heroes automatically instead of having actual specific reasons for that is very important. Usually what a player would say is that, oh, if the enemy team runs this team comp, or if I am on this kind of map, I usually like to run this character, and in these situations I like to run this character. He didn't say that. He just said that he defaults to Widowmaker automatically, and if he feels useless on Widowmaker, he then goes on to Ashe. And that is a very, very unconstructive and very, very bad mindset to have, because there's no real thought behind what he's doing. It's almost as if he's following commands, as if he has a little document where he just needs to follow a few rules without actually understanding why he is doing anything. And that also explains what he mentions afterwards. He mentions how he doesn't understand why he is struggling on Widow. He doesn't understand why he's useless on Sombra, because instead of trying to make decisions based off of proper reasoning, right? I pick this character because of this reason, I pick this character because of this reason. If he doesn't have any reasoning behind what he does, then he's also not going to have any reasoning behind his actual gameplay, right? So now I knew that the reason his win percentage was this low, or why he hasn't improved over the last year, is because his fundamental approach to the game is completely off, essentially, right? He's very comparable to a to a boosted player. Okay, that's kind of a weird analogy to make. It's essentially that he's at his rating without actually understanding what he's doing. He's playing purely off of instinct, which isn't going to work. He's doing the right things sometimes, but he doesn't understand why he's doing them. And if he doesn't understand how his character works, he lacks a lot of adaptability. And that's what I'm going to go into with the coachee moving forward. But the important part is that last segment told me what the core issue with this player was. Now I need to get to the root of the problem, right? Why does he not put any thought into which character to pick? Why does he not understand what he's doing wrong and why he's losing matches? So would you say that because of Bunker, you're spending the majority of your time on Sombra right now instead of Oda?
Instead of characters that I would like to be playing. Like last season, I mainly played. I got my time over Ashe. Ashe like overtook Widow, so I feel like because I don't think I might have an understanding of bunkers maybe, or it might be just that I'm not playing what I really want to enjoy. I'm not really 100% sure as to why, I guess.
Okay. No, that's what I was referring to. There's a real lack of confidence in the player. He just doesn't know what he's doing or why he's doing it. He's very instinctive, and he does things just because someone else could tell him. And now I could take this session into a different direction. I could just tell him, oh, well, this is how you play Sombra, this is how you pick Widow. I could tell him all of those things, but and that's probably what most coaches would do, but that doesn't actually help the player in the long term, because what's going to end up happening is that he's going to reach a point where maybe he has to learn a new character, or the meta changes and he has to learn how to play against a different composition. And if that fundamental issue that's causing him to be this clueless about his decision making is not fixed, then he's going to start becoming dependent on you to give him that information. But I want to figure out how I can teach him to find that information on his own. No, we're starting to get somewhere now. This is definitely going in the right direction, which is good. When you play... Okay, so out of your hero pool, which character do you think is the strongest against Bunker?
Definitely, I think it might be Sombra.
Okay. I think it might be Sombra. Now, this is going to seem very nitpicky, but the way he phrased that is very important. I think it might be Sombra. He's not confident. He doesn't just say, oh, well, Sombra is good against it. Right? And the reason he isn't confident about that is either because someone else told him that Sombra is the strongest, or that it's just a guess. And neither of those are optimal. Because if he would have done some research and he would have actually looked into it, then he would have been able to tell me very confidently, Widow sucks against Bunker, Ashe is kind of meh against Bunker, and Sombra is a very, very strong pick against Bunker. Right? But he didn't know that. He didn't have the confidence to tell me that. Right, and that's something that I need to fix. I need him to get to a point where he can confidently explain why he's picking certain characters rather than just blindly guessing. So, have you been playing more Sombra than the other characters as of late?
Yes, yeah. She currently is overtaking my whole hero pool. I had to pick her up because, well, yeah, I originally picked her up because I couldn't play Zarya. So I thought, oh, maybe I can do Sombra Growths when I was, trying out for teams and things like that, or playing against that. When other teams would run it on comp, I would pick Sombra because I did not want to pick up Zarya. So Sombra and then the more I got into Sombra, the more I realized, oh, now Bunkers is a new thing. I can run Sombra now against them too. I'm trying to learn her, I guess.
Again, see, now we're getting somewhere. So he told me that the reason that he didn't pick Zarya or pick up Zarya is because he just didn't want to, right? But that kind of goes against what he said previously, because the overall impression that we've gotten so far is that he puts in the hours. He specifically switched from console to PC so he could be on the more competitive platform. He wants to compete in open division and then eventually go pro. Clearly he takes the game very seriously, but he said that he didn't pick up Zarya because he didn't want to pick up Zarya, which goes directly against his competitiveness, because if a player is competitive, he's going to do whatever is going to help him win, rather than saying, oh, I don't want to play meta, I'm just going to play whatever I want, right?
So
okay. Just as a little side note, this isn't super relevant, but I did want to mention that Sombra is actually, especially at your rating, one of the most oppressive characters in the entire game. So Sombra is the kind of character that, assuming on the meta, or depending on the meta, you can one-trick your way into GM low top 500 with just Sombra, pretty much, which is something that you can't do during the current meta with a character like Widow. Widow does have metas where she can just solo carry her way up into top 500, but even very good Widowmaker players would struggle against Bunker comp. So just right out of the way, Sombra is, for one, obviously very, very strong against Bunker comp. I'm going to go into the specific reasons why that is later.
okay.
But Your warm up. Did you adjust your warm up at all, taking into account that you're playing Sombra more now?
I did not know. My usual is just to do Widow. I guess a little bit of training, just because I don't really know how I guess I could practice Sombra. Um, I guess, but yeah, it's mainly just because I go into comp thinking, oh, maybe I'll get to play Widow a little bit today. Maybe I'll get to play a little bit of Ash.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as I get like oppressed as Widow, uh, or like yeah, I just get shut down. I just can't do anything. I just automatically switch to Sombra like within like the first few minutes.
So why
If
wouldn't
I
you?
just like
Okay. Now we're starting to get somewhere. So now I essentially have the coachee exactly where I want him, and that sounds a little bit like the coachee is my prey, but it's a very good way to kind of figure it out because um, whenever you're having an assessment and a coaching session, it's essentially about getting the player to tell you what you need him to tell you, right? Because you can't always ask specific questions. I can't read the mind of the player, so I need him to tell me what his issue is. Because if he tells me what his issue is, then he understands what his issue is, right? I dislike going ahead and saying, oh, this is your particular issue. What I much prefer is getting to a point where he himself is going to conclude that, oh, wait, what you're saying kind of makes sense, right? Like, this seems to be a big issue of mine. And he used the word again about how he like starts in Widowmaker and then he switched to Sombra automatically. And automatically is a very, that was kind of the key bad term here, because under automatically I interpreted without much thought. He wouldn't swap for any particular reason, he would just swap automatically on its own, right? Without really, putting any thought. He wouldn't, consider other options. He would just be like, oh, well, Widowmaker isn't working. I'm going to switch to Sombra. And spoiler alert, that was the player's main issue. The player's main issue that I assessed was, for one, that he struggled making those kinds of educated decisions, and we're going to figure out why he struggles making those educated decisions in a second. But his main issue in this particular case was that he would open up automatically on certain characters and then make decisions in the game automatically. He had zero adaptability, he had zero understanding of the game and when to make swaps and all of that stuff. So because he didn't understand why he should make, certain changes or swap certain characters or play in a certain way, he didn't understand that, so he had to rely on essentially playing like a robot, right? Like with if then statements. If Widowmaker doesn't work, then we pick Sombra, right? And that's obviously too fundamental to make these kinds of decisions. So I wanted to understand why his understanding is so fundamental, how we could help him develop a more in-depth understanding that allows him to make those decisions better, and obviously making him aware that simply making these blind decisions and these automatic changes is not going to be very constructive to him in the long term. Okay, so you open up your games on a Widowmaker and then you see what comp they have and then you go Sombra.
yes. Well, it depends. Yeah, if I go Widow, I see they have, let's say, Bunker with maybe a Genji. I'm like, okay, maybe I'm gonna get dived on a lot, or I'm gonna get, I can't do much. As soon as I die, maybe my second death, I'll switch off of Widow and go Sombra.
Okay, now it's starting to make sense. If you ever have a session with me and you hear me like giggle like that, that's a very good sign, because then I figured you out. My secret master plan has worked out. And in this case, I was obviously very happy, because at the start of the session, I was a little bit concerned that, that it's going to be very difficult to actually find out what issue this player has. And at this point, I think we were around 15 minutes into the session. Obviously, this video's length is going to be very representative because I'll always make these pauses. But I was very relieved. So that giggle was kind of like a haha, gotcha kind of giggle. Yeah, but now I can actually start going into more specifics with the player. In terms of percentage, how many of your games do you start on Widow but end up switching to Sombra?
Maybe, yeah, maybe like 80%.
Oh,
I guess a rough estimate, maybe.
Okay, I'm not gonna lie, you were a pretty tough case, but we're starting to get there. Good. I want to go back to the feeling useless part. Do you think that the feeling useless part was because of you having issues with your just hero pool getting countered, or also feeling useless because you didn't know how to specifically play Sombra into bunker comps?
Actually, yeah, I could say I could say both of those.
That is the most satisfying thing imaginable, actually, and that's why I wanted to make a video around this coaching session, because it was kind of like a bam, like a hole in one. Like it was kind of a difficult birth to go through, but at this point I really started to figure out what the issue was, and that is incredibly rewarding and fulfilling to actually reach this point. And again, usually this point is reached a little bit earlier because no offense, most players think their problems are very unique, but you know, every player always usually fits into a category, but this one was a little bit more unique. Now, I knew what his issues were, but the only problem was figuring out why those issues existed.
Actually, just because not really, because Sombra is a completely new character to me now. I'm still kind of like learning her as I keep playing comp.
Mm-hmm.
And then also with my hero pool, I'm not really sure how to play my own hero pool into bunkers, I guess, as well. But even when it's not like bunkers, for example, I still feel like I have to be put into like, I guess when I say bunkers, if I see an Orisa or Hog, I immediately know, hey, I should probably go to Sombra, or even if I see a Monkey Diva, because with like how it is, I just get dived on. I'm not really sure as to what I need to do.
Mm-hmm. So, what have you done to try and alleviate that? So, if you've been paying attention, again, the way that he talks is very unconfident, kind of wishy-washy, you know, not really sure what to say because he doesn't fundamentally understand what he's talking about, right? And that question that I just asked, you know, what are you doing to alleviate that? Specifically, the question is, okay, so you don't know what you're doing. What are you doing to better understand what you're doing? Because I knew that the reason that if he was doing everything properly, he should understand the decisions that he's making. And the only reason why he wouldn't understand what he's doing is if someone else was telling him what to do. And as it turns out, that's actually the jackpot. That's what ended up happening.
Like, alleviate for which one? For which hero?
To be more specific, you are feeling useless as Sombra into bunker at times because you just don't know what to do. What have you done to try and fix that?
I have tried to, join team chat and try to make callouts and try to work everything and coordinate everything together. As to like try to, hey, I have EMP, we can use two alts maybe here, but I feel like sometimes at the most times for me myself, I personally know that I don't know when to use AMP, and I don't know like how to use my abilities the best way I can compared to like let's say Ash or
Mm-hmm.
McCree.
Okay. What have you done to answer those questions for you? Okay, so that's also something that happens. I essentially asked him, what have you done to fix those issues? And he gives me an answer. And then I have to ask the exact same question twice because, you know, it's kind of a slow process and he didn't understand the initial question. So he kind of explained how he doesn't understand those things. But, you know, he didn't actually answer the question of what is he doing to better understand those things, which we're getting to now. And obviously, the last question was a little bit of a waste of time, but you know, it happens, and it's usually not really a big problem. With the way that I do my sessions, it's not like, you know, I'm on a clock and then as soon as we hit the time, you know, we call it. So if, you know, communication is an issue or maybe I need to ask a question twice, that's usually not an issue because I never want my coachees, sorry for hitting the microphone, I never want my coachees to feel like they have to rush in order to get as much value out of the session. They're always going to get the exact same amount of value, you know, out of the session. You know, I'm taking care of that, and if I feel like he hasn't reached the value that he needs, if his questions haven't been answered by the time the session is over, then I just extend the session. That's no problem at all.
I usually take hints or like notes from a friend of mine because whenever we duo, he says just hack, or I mainly like obviously it'd be the main three would be like for example like your Ryan or a tank, I guess, Ryan, Diva, and even maybe like a Genji. So I get like the original concept of that is just that like in the moment, I'm not sure. I'm still kind of like a little confused. Sometimes I hear, oh, you should do it before a team fight. Oh, do it when save it for B, or it just varies, I guess.
And he just assessed his issue essentially by himself. And obviously it was difficult to get to this point, but he just got exactly where he needed to be, right? So it turns out that there's a friend that is giving him advice, and he just gave some examples on that advice, save EMP for this, do this, do this, do this. And the problem is that that is very, very inefficient coaching, because you can tell players rules that they should follow. If that happens, that should happen. If, you have EMP, you need to do that. If you do this, and then you do that. But the problem is that this player that has been giving him advice wasn't really qualified to give him that advice. So what my client ended up doing is he followed those rules that he was given, right? Like his friend essentially told him exactly how to play, but as it turns out, he didn't explain why those things were happening, and that was causing, problems. Mm-hmm. So you're essentially, so you have these questions on how to use EMP, and your friend answers them for you, and you take notes off of that.
Yeah, I try to like keep them with me sometimes, but even then, like a little part of me understands like when I should use EMP, but like it's just the mechanic part of me that's like.
I'm sorry for interrupting. I want to understand more about. Can you go a bit more into that friend?
Oh yeah, so he's a off tank main. He had dropped. He used to be GM. He peaked at 41, I think. He had dropped because he's a Zari. He used to be like a Zari, like almost one trick. And then he would play a lot of goats. So he has his team, his OD team, and he just runs Sombra goats.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, or would you be more? Or
yes, I'm just a little bit confused. Why he's your primary source of information? Now, the next 4 to 5 minutes are not, they don't really require a lot of explaining, because at this point all of the hard work is done. At this point I already know what his issue is, and I think he's starting to realize that as well. I'm going to let the rest of the initial assessment run, so you can just listen how that goes. I'm not going to comment on that as much, and then at the end I'm going to give a quick summary in case you want to read that. But that was the initial assessment. Now we're essentially going to listen to the payoff, where we put all of the puzzle pieces together, instead of you just trying to learn all of that by yourself.
Okay. Yeah, so when I first got the game, or when I first started on Overwatch back in October, I had joined like a free tournament that you can win like a free loot box, I guess, if you win at the very end of it. And I started out as gold when I first started in Overwatch, and I got put onto their team, and they were mainly a mid master, so they try to even it out with like they had like a GM, and then obviously me with gold, so they kind of evened it out in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
And I've kind of like looked up to all of them when I first started Overwatch, because they were all, GM high masters players.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the one, after that the whole tournament ended, he stuck around, and we still kept talking, and we kept playing together and things like that. So I've kind of just like looked up to him through that.
Okay, I'm gonna put some cheesy Ace Attorney music over this bit, because I think it makes the section a lot more, dramatic, and it sounds a lot cooler. So if it's a little bit cheesy, then I'm sorry, but I think it adds a nice vibe to this. Mm-hmm. Okay. It's fine that you're looking up to him, but you do understand that you can't just. Okay, skill is always going to be very, very relative, right? Someone who's in platinum is going to look at like a random GM player, and he's going to think that that player is literally the second coming of Christ. Right? But when I look at the GM player, he's probably going to be pretty bad. All right, again, because it's all relatively speaking. All right. So what I'm wondering is, okay, so I'm just going to kind of share my suspicions with you now. When you are trying to learn from him, there's multiple issues. For one, there's a very, very high likelihood that he's going to tell you how to play, but he's not going to tell you why you should play that way. And a big thing that people kind of overlook is that Overwatch isn't just about memorizing stuff. It's about understanding, like actually understanding things, so that when you're put into a different situation, you can adapt your knowledge and you always know what you're supposed to do, right? So whenever you're so there's two things you can do, right? You can watch, owl POVs, you can review your own gameplay, you can do all that sort of stuff, and that allows you to develop your own understanding of how to play Sombra in these specific situations, right? Especially reviewing your own VODs is going to be extremely helpful because you're literally looking at the games where you struggle to play correctly, right? And of course the process is going to be slower and it's going to be lengthier, but it helps you to actually understand what is going on because it's the games that you're playing. Or when you're watching Owl POV, you're trying to learn from the best of the best. But you're kind of doing a middle ground that isn't going to work because you're not really learning to understand the game properly if you just copy whatever your friend is telling you. And if you want to copy something, then why not copy the best players in the world? Why copy a high masters low GM player, right? So to kind of summarize my findings now. So in general, whenever I look at a player, I always look at, how much time they put in first, how they use their time, what their hero pool is, etc. And you were giving me a little bit of trouble regarding that because your hero pool is completely fine. The hours you put into the game are, completely fine. But the problem is that your understanding of your hero pool, that's really where it's lacking. Right? And obviously I could go ahead and I could just give you the proper understanding, but I needed to find out why exactly your understanding was the way that it was. Because even if I would go ahead and tell you how to play Sombra correctly against those macro compositions, you wouldn't really get anywhere if all of a sudden you would talk to your friend again and he would tell you to do something different again, and then you wouldn't really understand it at all. Right? Now, the big key here for you, and we're gonna kind of transition now, right? So just to kind of summarize your assessment, again, time played is fine, hero pool is fine, all of that stuff is fine. The main problem that you have is that you lack a proper understanding of Sombra, and the reason you lack that proper understanding of Sombra is because you don't know how to properly gain that knowledge yourself through either doing your own VOD review or VOD reviewing owl level players. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so now we're going into how to actually, fix that issue, right? Okay, so that concludes the assessment. This is where we actually went into the VOD review portion. Now, the VOD review portion goes into a bit more detail regarding his specific issues with Sombra. I'm not going to go into that VOD review portion, but I obviously don't want to just, kind of leave you guys hanging. To summarize one of his main fundamental issues, what he did was he would open up every single round with Widowmaker, even against Bunker Comp, and he would keep playing Widowmaker until he would eventually conclude that, hey, Widowmaker doesn't work here. And when he was starting to feel useless on Widowmaker, he would switch onto Sombra. But the problem was that because he was wasting half the round on Widowmaker at the start and then switching to Sombra, by the time he would actually get an EMP, the round would already be over, right? So what the main fix that I gave him is to, for one, better understand why he should why he's opening up with certain characters on certain maps, to better understand why he's making certain switches, and that if he is feeling useless, that he should start to understand why he's being useless, right? Is it just a lack of skill? If yes, then obviously he needs to, do VOD reviews, learn more about the game, improve. Or because his pick is genuinely being suboptimal into the other team, right? But his main struggle was just that he kept playing against bunker compositions over and over and over again, and because he wasn't very confident in the characters he picked, he was completely screwing over his own ult economy, and he was never really getting any momentum because he was essentially wasting so much time on characters that he deemed useless. Now, there's a lot more to it, and there's a lot more detail to it. I'm not going to cover that in this video. I have some other coaching sessions that are a bit older uploaded, where you can go have a look at the actual VOD reviewing portion. But I wanted to go over the assessment here, just so you can better understand how we go from asking very basic questions to actually, in this case, finding out that apparently there is a player that is telling this client how to play, and he followed that advice blindly, which prevented him from ever developing a true understanding of how to play the game. And moving forward, I hope that he is going to be able to become independent from that person helping him, that he's going to do his own research, and that he's going to learn the game on his own pace, so that when he does something, he genuinely understands why he's doing it. My name is ioStux, and I'd like to thank you for learning.